I was a quiet, calm child. Apart from drifting off during lessons, there were no complaints about me. Books were my refuge. I would lose myself in their pages, distancing myself from the noise of the world. But I had one flaw. I loved boys' games. That wasn't a problem when I was little. In fact, the grown-ups even liked it. They called me a tomboy with a faint smile. There was hidden praise in those words. Beyond games, I was interested in boy stuff. They called me a tough girl, and somehow I was loved more for it. The beauty of childhood was that normal wasn't fully defined yet. At that age, no one worried much about what normal meant. Holidays were pure chaos for me, especially as a child. We weren't well off, so the new clothes bought for holidays were important. Those clothes would be worn throughout the year, so they were chosen carefully. I can't forget the white shoes bought for school openings, the lacy socks, the floral collars, and the tights I was forced to wear. I gathered my courage to object a few times. "These don't suit me," I told my mother. "But you couldn't wear sneakers to school. Apparently you had to wear those white, cute, but painfully tight shoes." "Girls are supposed to wear frilly things," my mother said. "But couldn't I just wear pants?" Apparently not. It was society's silent rule. Everyone knew it, but no one questioned it. Girls wore skirts, boys wore pants. There was nothing beyond that. The years passed like this. I lived with confusion about my identity, but I couldn't make sense of it. I thought and thought, trying to convince myself that all of this was normal. I modeled myself after my father. I tried to walk like him, talk like him. Sometimes, being born a girl felt unfair. But those thoughts were blurry shadows I couldn't name back then. When I turned 13, I received my first love letter. They found it at home while I was asleep. At first, there was uproar, chaos. Later, we realized it was from my 12-year-old friend, a girl, after seeing the name at the bottom. Lily. The yelling stopped, and they laughed. I was told not to see that girl again. I didn't understand, just felt confused. Girls could be friends with each other, but apparently, they couldn't love each other that way. "Kids," they said, laughing. And that was the end of it. If the letter had been from a boy, though, things would have been different. I wouldn't have been allowed to leave the house. My confusion grew. Girls couldn't write love letters to each other. I was a tomboy girl, but I wasn't supposed to fall in love with a boy either. That was the lesson I learned that day. It wasn't until years later that I realized everything I had learned that day was wrong. By the time I turned 17, I had become a professional kickboxer. After years woven with sweat, discipline, and perseverance, I felt freer in the ring. My training sessions started early in the morning when the city was still asleep. I punched the heavy bag in those quiet hours. Each strike unraveled the confusion inside me. The silence of the bag taught me to listen to my inner voice. One day my father waited for me after practice. "You were really good today," he said. His voice was proud, but there was hidden surprise in it. Maybe in his eyes I was still his little girl. But I knew who I was. I had a father until the day I came out to him. Then my world collapsed. He was determined to fix me. Insults, public scolding, even dragging me down the street. None of it worked. "I'll listen if a doctor says so," he declared. But he never kept that promise. Psychiatry became mandatory. Seeing a professional was nice, but the system was different. Doctors held the power. I saw many during that time. One kept asking about my favorite childhood color and toys. To him, girls liked pink and boys liked blue. Girls played with dolls, boys with cars. I loved blue and green as a child. I still do. Blue feels like looking at the sky. It calms me. But I didn't tell him that. I said I liked green. I played with cars and dolls. My favorites were my bear and train. Since he couldn't box me in, the process dragged on. There was another doctor I saw for group therapy. By then, I was tired of the long process. I recited rehearsed answers to his questions. He smiled. The client before you was a bald, bearded trans woman. Stereotypes don't define who you are. I exhaled deeply. Finally, I had found someone who listened. But some things didn't change. Arguments with my father grew harsher. My daughter, why do you dress like this? My daughter, you need to shape up. Those words were etched into my mind. Whenever I raised my voice, his anger intensified. I'm not your daughter, Dad. I'm Ocean, I shouted, my voice trembling. He looked at me like I was an insect, like a bug spoiling a perfect meal. Whatever he saw in my eyes, he didn't like it. That day, he slammed the door so hard the walls shook. My mother looked at me, her eyes brimming with tears, but she said nothing. It wasn't just my father's silence that suffocated me. You don't have a father anymore, he said as he left. His words weighed on my heart like a stone. I no longer had a father. But was he really gone? He stood on the other side of that door, but he refused to see me. Watching a father estrange himself from his child was heavier than watching someone lose themselves. That day, being Ocean became an even lonelier path.